Namaste children, welcome to today's culture course class. Today we are going to discuss lesson number 9, Warfare in Ancient India. Warfare in Ancient India. Our land is not only a nation of saints and philosophers, but also of heroes and warriors. So our ancient India is not only the nation of saints and philosophers, but also of heroes and warriors. The Vedas and Puranas contains many stories about our fighting ways. So the Vedas and Puranas, they have many stories about our fighting ways. Dhanurveda, or the science of war, was a limb of the Vedas. Dhanurveda, the science of war, was a limb of the Vedas. The Devas and the Asuras were always fighting against each other. Indra, the king of Devas, had a mighty weapon called Vajrayuda or thunderbolt. So the what is here? The king of all Devas, always Devas and the Asuras, means known as Rakshasas, they will have the fighting always against each other. The king of gods, named as Indra, he has a mighty weapon, a powerful weapon named as Vajrayuda or thunderbolt. The science and art of war was one of the lessons that ancient kings had compulsorily to learn. The science of the science and art of the the science of art and war was one of the lessons the ancient kings had compulsory they should learn. Those who fought wars belong to a class called Kshatriyas. Those who will fight in the wars, they are known as what? Kshatriyas. Kshatriyas formed on an honored section of our society. They looked upon it as their duty to protect the people against enemies. So these Kshatriyas, they formed an honored section of people in our society. They looked upon in protecting the people against enemies. The Ramayana and the Mahabharata contain vivid descriptions of battles, the way they were fought, and the weapons the warriors used. The Ramayana and the Mahabharata, they contain different types of battles and the way they fought each other, and the weapons what they used. Full details of the techniques of wars are contained in books like Kautilya's Arthashastra and Sukra Niti Sara. So the full details of the weapons and the techniques which were used in the olden days, so that is in the ancient days, were present in the books like Kautilya's Arthashastra and Sukra Niti Sara. Our ancients had four divisions in the army. Our ancients, they have the four divisions, four groups in the army. They were the Ratha or the chariots, Gaja or elephants, Turaga or the horses, Padadi or foot soldiers. So four ways, four divisions are there. Some of them will use in Radhas, and some they use elephants, some they use horses, and some they use by walk, that is foot soldiers. The chariots were heavy, they were drawn by horses. They flew flocks of the warriors occupying them. 6 men besides the warrior occupied the chariot. Two of them bore the shield on either side of the defense. Two were archers. The other two were armed with what it is javelins. See here, this they used the chariots and they were heavy. They were carried by the horses. 6 men besides the warrior occupied in the chariot. Two of them were bore the shield on either side of the defense. Two were archers who will throw these arrows, and two were the armed with javelins they use. Soldiers on horses carried darts and shields. Their bodies were covered with the hides or iron armors and helmets. Soldiers on horses were carried darts and shields. Their bodies were covered with the hides and iron armors and helmets. Foot soldiers fought with the bow and arrows or sword and shield. The Ajanta frescoes contain figures of such soldiers. So soldiers who are moving by foot, they used to fight with arrows and sword and the shield. The bow was tall as the person carrying it. He placed one end of the bow on the ground and clutching it with his left foot and would shoot the arrow when the string by drawing it far as back as possible. So the bow was tall as the person carrying it. It is the high as long as height as taller as the person who is carrying it. And he placed one end of the bow on the ground and the clutching it with his foot. He would shoot the arrow from the starting by drawing it as far as the back as possible. Is it clear, children, what we discussed now? Yes. Yes. The largest unit of the army was called Akshohini. The largest number of people of army people, we call them as what? Akshohini. It contained 21,870 chariots, as many elephants, 3 times that the number of horses, and 5 times of the number of foot soldiers. So there 21,870 people were there in the what it is called uh, chariots, and as many elephants as there are 3 times that the number of horses and 5 times the number of foot soldiers. An army contained many such units. We learn this from the Mahabharata. This we learn from the Mahabharata. The chief of the army was called Senapati or commander. What we call this chief of the army officer? It is Senapati or commander. The great warriors manning the chariots were classified as Maharathis and Athirathis. Maharathis and Athirathis. Hathirathis. Maharathis and Hathirathis. There are 2 categories are there. The gunpowder was known in ancient India. There was one weapon called Satyagni, which could kill 100 men at a time. We do not yet know how it worked. So gunpowder was known in the ancient India itself, and there was one weapon called Satagnani, Satagnani, which could kill 100 men at a time. We do not yet know how it worked. Weapons were of 2 kinds, Astra and Shastra. Astra and Shastra. The former were thrown and the latter would wounded like the sword. So Astras were thrown using, then Shastras were wounded like the sword. There were also supernatural weapons. The common weapons were the bow, arrow, javelin, mace, armor, and helmet, etc. These weapons bore the royal emblems. Kautilya mentions hundreds of weapons. Some of them were used like catapults for destroying the ports of enemies. So the common weapons were used as bow, arrow, javelin, mace, armor, helmet, and these weapons bore the royal emblems. And ports were important for defense. Balls of fire were blown by means of birds to burn the forts of the enemies. So they use birds also to carry these balls of fire, and which will make the burn on the what I mean to say, it is the ports of the enemies. The ports of the enemies. Then the conch, Dundubi, the conch, Dundubi, Beri, and Panawa were musical instruments used in wars. They also use musical instruments also to in the wars. Medical units and nurses followed armies to look after wounded soldiers. Medical camps were there, and nurses were there to look after the wounded soldiers. The army was arranged in several ways to fight wars according to the place and tactics. The chakra, wheel type; vyuha, chakra vyuha, wheel type; suchi, needle type; suchi vyuha; chanakya vyuha, hawk; and mala, garland vyuha were the formations often used. So this army people, they arrange these fighters in such a way, like what it is, chakra vyuha, suchi vyuha, chanakya vyuha, mala vyuha. Our ancients made use of dutas or ambassadors as peacemakers and charas or spies for finding out the secrets of the enemies. Our ancient made use of what dutas or ambassadors as peacemakers and also spies for finding out secrets from the enemies. There were certain well-defined rules of war in ancient India. Wars were fought in broad daylight and parties retired at sunset. Powerful weapons were not used against those who fled or yielded. Unfair means were not adopted. There were many rules in the ancient India during the wars. So wars were fought in the daylight only, not in the sunset. Powerful weapons were not used against those who fled or yielded. Unfair means should not adopted. In the Mahabharata, Bhishma says that he did not like to strike a man who had laid down his arms, who had fallen, who had taken off his armor, who was asleep, who was running away, or who was a humble position. So in Mahabharata, Bhishma said he don't like to strike a man who had laid down his arms, who kept his arms down, means who is surrendered, who had fallen down, and who was running away from the place, and who was humble position. Wars of aggression were not unknown. Its most civilized form was Ashwamedha. The aggressor sent his royal horse to graze in the territory of another king. If the latter allowed it, it means he accepted the overlordship of the first king. If, on the contrary, he stopped the horse or arrested it, war followed. So we don't know the reasons in the olden days what for they are fighting each other. The most civilized forms of war is Ashwamedha. In that, one king will send a horse into the other king's territory. If that king allows the horse to graze, then he is the subordinate of the first king. Otherwise, he is ready to fight with the first king. Modern science and technology have made all these outdated, yet we continue to preserve the spirit of defense and defense against any aggressor. Because of modern science and technology have made all these outdated, yet we continue to preserve the spirit of defense and defense against any aggressor. Yes, this we have seen different kinds of weapons and different kinds of vyuhas, how the army people were arranged in the war to fight against all the people. I hope you understand, and thank you very much.